I got asked to do it by the director, Johnny McKnight. And I know Johnny, I've worked with him before, which is always an advantage when you're doing new work, because you're a kind of team already. You can have a few shortcuts. And I was given the script. And again, it's new work, but the script was quite developed. Sometimes it's not, but this had a lot of work been done on it. So it was in a good place. And that's how the start of the process begins. So I read the play, always read the play. More than once is often useful. And just get a feel of the style of it. And often I get an idea quite quickly. And if I don't, then I have to really think about why that is and what I'm not being able to visualise about it. And then I would have a meeting with the director, which is Johnny, and we discussed, and he came with quite firm ideas of the style of it. Again, a very useful thing. I wasn't searching for that. It's quite a fast-moving play. It goes to lots of places, lots of things happen in it, like ice baths. How do you do that? But because it moves fast, you don't want to slow that down at all by moving pieces of scenery or trying to transform the space into a completely different thing. So the style of it was fast-moving. So what you're trying to create is a kind of playground for the actors and the director to work on. I've actually been to Highland Games and I haven't seen it, and I had no idea. I maybe did see it and didn't understand where it was. Now you start to think back. But so I had a whole, when they said wrestling, I immediately went for this kind of wrestling you see on TV. And because of the start of the show starts like that, I was looking at these amazing, how you construct a boxing ring or a wrestling ring, which is a feat in itself. Because if you think about the construction of that and how people bounce off the ropes and things, how does that stand up? How does it just not fall over? So I learned a lot about wrestling rings, but I didn't use that at all. But so you end up discovering things that you never think you'll do in my job, which I really enjoy, and researching things. So I looked at backhold wrestling, found out it was in a field, in the mud, in the grass, in the rain, in the Highland Games. And just to understand the metaphor of the wrestling and what that meant to the rest of the play. So that was an interesting way of thinking about it. I tried to think of ways that I could get the outside inside, and went through a whole stage of thinking we could do it on real grass, to tour real grass, which you could do. You need to look after it. I don't think the crew would appreciate me much, but we could have done that. There's also very good fake grass you get. We went through a stage of thinking it could be done in a pile of mud. But that started to be a bit impractical. So I went back and looked at it, and I started to look at, I found a flooring, which was my kind of initial hit-off point that I think I really like this, it works well. And it's rubber, it's reconstructed rubber tyres. So it's used in playgrounds and things like that. It's a soft fall thing for play areas. And it was taking a little while to arrive. So meanwhile, while the cast were practicing the wrestling and they had to fall to the floor, they had to do rolls, they were given, well, first of all, they were given big crash mats, and then we got them down to a small crash mat, like a judo mat, but they got very used to it. So when I then introduced the rubber matting, they were hurting themselves on it and they were wanting to keep a hold of the judo matting. So Alice, the production manager, had a search and found on Gumtree a judo place that was wanting rid of all these old judo mats, and we couldn't have been more lucky. So and they were the right colour, they were a kind of khaki green, even better. So we got all these judo mats that we were able to cut up and make the size that we wanted them to be. So I changed the flooring. So that made sense. Some of the plays set in a gym. But it made me think it's not a gym maybe that you get in the central belt of Scotland. It's maybe a gym you'd get in a more rural setting, or a village hall that had the facility to have these wall bars that pull out, which I remember from when I was at school. So then I started to think about wall bars, climbing, and what that does to the space. It makes the playing area then goes from just a flat playing area to an up and down playing area as well. So it makes it a three-dimensional area that the actors can work in. So I started to investigate that, and I came up with the idea of each person having their own little wall bar, which gave them an area to be on their own with, to use it to hang things up in, but also an area that they could all use at any time. I think that's important to make a model so that everybody understands the three-dimensional space, and the model is to scale. It's a scale to 1 to 25, which is what's commonly used in the theatre. That means like 1 centimetre is 25 times bigger than it is in the model. And it's important to do it to scale because you have to understand the proportions of a person within the space, and it also has to fit in all the venues because it's a touring production, which puts a whole other different side to it, because it's not just one space that fits in, it has to fit in them all. And you try not to make it that it's too different in any spaces. And in fact, this one was exactly the same in every single space, apart from in the rural touring venues, it was off the grounds, it was on a raised platform, and that's because so everybody can see, really. So we made our own little stage, but that became part of the design, and it made sure that everybody, no matter what kind of hall we were in, had a good view of the play. But in some venues, like in the Traverse, it's in the Traverse at the end, the seating bank is looking down on the floor, so we didn't need the raised area in that, but it worked in both spaces equally as well. The key relationships with your director, because you've got to be working together to make something work. You all want to be heading in the same direction. So that's a really important relationship. Also, the lighting designer is really important because you talk about colours together, you talk about where things happen, where atmospheres change in the mood of a piece within the whole show, how the mood changes. So that's important to discuss with the lighting designer and the sound designer. But your key to all that is the director. And if you're lucky, the writer as well. Well, I was able to ask her what she meant by some of it sometimes and what was important to her to see and what she felt about it. And she was showing drawings and development bits at different stages just to make sure that she was happy and it was within the world that she had in her head as well. And luckily it was. So it's fine. But the person who's directing it is your key person. The Green Book, they do the middle level of that, which is, I can't remember all the numbers and everything to do with it, but it's actually quite hard to achieve because sometimes when you source things, you don't know where they've come from and how they're made. And although you think it's recycled, there's maybe a process that it goes through that it's not very green at all. And luckily, there's a team of people at NTS that have quite a lot of knowledge about all that and have time to look into the processes of making things. So there's an advantage there. I think for me, to be honest, you feel like you do it a lot of the time anyway because of the lack of funding to put shows on sometimes, and different companies have maybe not any money at all. So you can be very resourceful, so you tend to recycle without thinking about it. But it's not just about recycling, it's about how things are made and where the component parts of things come from. And again, luckily in the National Theatre, they've got a big stock of equipment, material, furniture. So you're starting at an advantage there. But we also got the set built by a new company called Marmoset. They're based in Glasgow, and their basis of their work is using, the starting point is recycled materials. So they'll source wood and metal and basic materials from things that have been used before. Rural touring, which means you go into spaces that are not theatres, that are varying sizes. You need to know all the sizes of all the venues, and then you either make it in component parts where it can get bigger and smaller, or you do it to a size that will work in every space. Luckily, this one would work in every space, so we didn't need to take it apart and change the size of it apart from the platform. And also for the lighting design of it, which is a really important part of this design, because the whole back wall, Lizzie Powell, the lighting designer, designed a wall panel of a pixel wall, really, that she got made especially to fit in a tiny space, a thin space behind the set. And it meant that you could create things like numbers. You could make patterns with all the dots with light. and which takes a lot of programming, but it was so effective and I think really conveys the idea of the characters. Imagine that this is a starry wrestling match, but actually the reality of it is they're in a muddy field somewhere. But it gives you that kind of double thing, and it also helped edit from one scene to the other, and helps you look, it directs your focus to look at certain areas of the stage when certain scenes are happening, the lighting. The final design was a raised area. It was kind of based on a wrestling ring, boxing ring, without the ropes around it. I used flooring, which changed during the process, to a thicker judo-style mat in a kind of khaki green colour, because I wanted to keep the green, to keep the nature in it somewhere, and a bit of rubber flooring at the back. Each character had their own wall-mounted climbing bar. They had a section at the top you could climb up it and you could sit on the top of it. Behind that there was a framework that held a projection screen, and behind the projection screen is a pixel wall that Lizzie, the lighting designer, designed. So it lit up and did all sorts of different things. And it had 5 red chairs, 5 red plastic bucket chairs, which were a good colour, that the NTS had in the store. Perfect.